I could not be more excited about this My Sales Day podcast. I welcome back Doug Weaver, a close friend, who has forgotten more about selling than you. In this episode, Doug and I take on the number one skill, objection handling. The entire show is dedicated to it. Our goal, to give you tips, recommendations, and inspirations on how to deal with objections. Every buyer has objections about your offering. But the good news is they'll still buy even with all of your product blemishes and warts. That's really good news. Objection handling is mastered by studying tactics and by straightening your spine. Come on, let's do it. Everyone, straighten your spine. In this show, you're going to pick up tactics, strategies, and a burst of inspiration, and you're going to go get those objections, and you're going to be great solving them. Let's head on over to the show right now. Sales is hard, brutally hard, and it's messy. Welcome to My Sales Day, a podcast by sellers for sellers. I'm your host, Michael Hess, and it's my job to make sales less messy for you and make sure that by listening to this show, you get skill ideas and action items to help your sales career. You're gonna get some hugs too. Yes, hugs. You need support and you don't often get it from inside your org. And you certainly don't get it from the street. I aim to make your time here educational, inspirational, and actionable. So let's get into it. Doug Weaver, welcome back to the My Sales Day podcast. How are you, Doug?
I couldn't be better. Thanks for having me, Michael.
You look great. I'm excited that you're here. We last spoke, in case you forgot, on May 20 of last year. We did a podcast. I think I was in this chair. You were in that chair. And so much has changed in your life, my life too. But I want to talk about some of the recent career things that you've been through. The venerable and esteemed Upstream Group is no more, and you've launched a great new venture, which I want to hear about, called the Weaver Collective. But let's first start with Upstream. I got two questions for you, and some of the fans of yours who are going to be listening are probably going to want some inside baseball on this. How emotional was it for you to move on from something that you were so successful at? What was that like?
I appreciate the question. The short answer I'll give you is that the rightness of the decision and the rightness of the timing really helped to I don't want to say take away the emotional content, because I do feel a real sense of pride of what we accomplished, a connection to my team, which has included, a couple of dozen people over the years. So it wasn't without emotion, but it was all good emotion. It was the right time to do it, and I felt that the best part of the decision was that Upstream Group was never just about me, right? It was never just a one-man show. It was always a group of people, and also the group and Upstream Group was really about every customer who I worked with, every class member in every workshop, every reader of the Drift, you name it, every attendee at the seller forum. So that was the group, and I felt like this needs to have a proper end. This isn't just Doug Weaver kind of keeping on and doing a little bit less as time goes by. And, felt like I wanted there to be a salutable moment for Upstream Group. And we got that a couple of months ago, which felt great. And now I'm probably going to, have a lot of emotions as I embark on the new venture, right? Because I'm literally now just a solo act. So this is, this is Trey leaving Fish behind for a solo album. So we'll see how they like it.
Well, both you and Trey adore Vermont. That's where you are right now, and I do too, and I like that attitude. Good answer. I'm going to put you on the spot. What was the most important thing you learned over that multi-decade experience of helping sellers, of helping sales managers? What stood out as number one? And if you have to get into number two, that's fine too. But was there one particular thing you can capture?
Yeah, there was actually a moment where this learning coalesced for me, and I would say it was probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 years into my run, which ultimately lasted 28 years. And I was, I had been doing my thing in workshops and sharing lots of slides and information, and it kind of got into my groove. And I had finished a workshop one day in New York, and that night I was having drinks with a friend, right? And he immediately started to quiz me. Hey, how did things go? What was the workshop like? And did you have, like, did you tell them this story? And did they laugh at this joke? And so on and so on, right? And I just had this moment, Michael, where I said, "Oh shit, I've been doing this wrong. I've been focused on my own performance versus what's in it for them." And that may sound very kind of, very Boy Scout of me to do that, but what I realized there and then was that I needed to be the host and not the entertainment. Because these gatherings then in IRL and more recently combination of those kinds of workshops and on Zoom, this was often an opportunity for these people to create connections between each other, right, among themselves. So I started to really, that day, literally the next day, I started to do a lot more checking in and going to that person in the third row who wasn't speaking, and saying, hey, Chelsea, I really want to hear your thoughts on this, right? I haven't heard much from you today. How do you feel about this? So a lot more checking in, a lot more hosting. And I think what that did was it gave me a level of sustainability, right? And so that people felt good about having me back because they felt heard and understood. And then also it just created a lot more information coming back to me because, half this job is about listening and learning. Right. So the old, I've heard, I think you were the first person I heard say this about two ears and one mouth. And
Come on, stop. No,
I finally kind of got that on a very visceral level. And so being the host and not the entertainment, making it about them, that was the biggest thing that I learned. And that obviously has implications for one's life as well.
yes, and a lot of applicability to sellers out there who are trying to engage people, whether it's a lunch and learn, whether it's seven people on a Zoom, four people on a Zoom, what have you. So I like that. That's a really, really great takeaway. And thank you
Can
for
I can
sharing
I
that.
take a sec? Can I take a 15-second side trip
Yeah,
and
sure,
embellish that with an anecdote?
sure.
Once during a workshop, a guy came up to me at the break and he said, "Hey, Doug, I want to get your thoughts on something." He said, I need a strategy to make my customers feel like I care. How do I do that? And I thought at first that the guy was kind of putting me on, and I looked at him and I realized, like, oh my God, he's dead serious. And I said, well, could you care? I mean, this
Show you
is
care.
you are doing this 10 or 11 hours a day, and for a long time. You know, just care. Just actually get outside yourself and your sales goals and care about what happens to the customer and whether like this is making their life easier. And it's like, but that little bit of humanity, which is a theme you and I have explored, that little bit of humanity, right? That little bit of like, hey, let's take off the masks and get down to like, helping each other
And
changes
I
everything.
firmly believe, thank you for that. And that's a wonderful anecdote. I firmly believe that that never goes out of style, no matter what technology innovations or progress has occurred, no matter how much we're using AI to write every one of our emails, not just prospecting emails. Care goes a long way. Well, thank you
Mhm.
for that. I personally am not bummed Upstream is gone because maybe the sloppy seconds that I have been eating the last decade as a sales trainer will now turn into beef Wellington. Doug, refer some business to me. Come on, I'm still playing. All right, quickly tell us about the Weaver Collective because we got objection handling we got to get to.
So, what the Weaver Collective is, to be very simple about it, is it is a networked coaching practice. I have a total of 30 memberships available. Each membership comes with 10 one-to-one coaching sessions with me, and coaching is something I've been doing a lot more of over the past 6 or 7 years. And also 3 gatherings of the larger group. So I'm going to bring the full collective together on Zoom 3 times a year. Most importantly, it's like leaving the goal over this, couple 3 years that I do this or more, will be to leave behind a generation of sales leaders who are connected to values and themes and to, sustainable practices, but more importantly, are connected to each other. So this is building a strong network of these people who will have somebody to go to ask the question of, hey, are you guys doing this as well? And how would you handle a situation like this? So I'm really energized by it because I feel like at this stage of my career, this is the most meaningful thing that I can do, right? If I can make
And
a difference with these 30 managers, boy, you throw a rock in that pond and the ripples are huge.
and exceptionally needed right now. My premise in also doing what you do, coaching, mentoring, guiding, formally teaching what I call line managers, is they are some of the most unsupported individuals in an organization and often have elevated into roles where they know less about best practices and skill requirements
Mm-hmm.
than even when they were thrown into a bullpen, X number of years prior. So good luck with that. Thank you. That brings us to the agenda. And again, I'm very excited about this. It's a single topic focus that I know will inspire every seller to dedicate more brain power, and that is to objection handling. Doug and seller out there listening, let me set this up for a bit because this topic is very important to me and it's a very hot topic. It's a very sensitive topic because you see, I've been wrestling with this whopper of all skills for 30 plus years. And by the way, I can only think of one person who could try to lighten my load, and that is you, and I'm delighted you're with me. Personally, I have been teaching what I call OH skills and frameworks when I was a sales leader for 25 years and as a sales trainer like you the last 12 years. And I find it so important that we will probably need another show for sure, but I just want us to lose ourselves and just try to provide as many solid recommendations for the listener as possible. But I first have to offer the remember this if nothing else into the show to start us off.
Mm-hmm.
Your pursuit of advancing your OH skills, the ones that help you get through roadblocks and buyer resistance, is a never-ending career pursuit. And it's the same with me. I'm obsessed studying it and figuring new ways, approaches, and techniques that are going to work because it, in my opinion, is the number one sales skill that has to be tended to constantly. Okay, one more point that should give us all hope. Every seller who is listening out there should not feel that they have to be perfect with their OH skills or
Mm-hmm.
that there is a perfect approach. And you and I are going to debate a lot of that stuff. I have ideas, you have ideas. And again, I quote the fact that baseball players can still get into the Hall of Fame with a 25% success rate. And I feel the same with sellers when it comes to OH. You can still close deals, not solving every objection in the minds of the buyer. Your offering has warts, it has blemishes, it has vulnerabilities, and it can still get bought. In fact, the mantra that I've carried around for decades is that it's the seller's job not to entirely resolve the objection,
Mm-hmm.
but to shrink it just enough. You just have to shrink it. Is it a mountain or is it a molehill? What am I dealing with? Okay, I can walk over molehills. I can't walk over mountains. All right,
Mhm.
I'm going to segue and open up this conversation with a quote from you, May 20. For those of you who did not hear Doug and me on our first podcast, go to mysalesday.io/podcasts or anywhere you listen to your podcasts. Easy to find us. It was a great session. You offered a comment that I wrote down and I love, and I'm gonna offer it here for everybody. This is a quote from you. Most people have a sense of empathy, said you, but we train humanity out of salespeople. This is not a conquest or a game to be won, end
Mhm.
quote, which is thinking that is in the face of conventional upbringing and ideas about like we have to master the client, we have to push ourselves through and everything.
Mhm.
Well, when it comes to objection handling, that's the worst pursuit. I told you the story earlier. I'm going to just offer the anecdote, then turn it over to you because I thought that quote is just awesome and it applies to what we're talking about. I've said this for 30 plus years. I look at most sellers as walking around with a tool belt. And instead of various tools on that belt, like screwdrivers of every variety, they've just got about 30 hammers hanging down from their waist. And they're just looking for a nail.
Mhm.
When it comes to objection handling, there's no place for that hammer, no place for the tool belt. Take it off. So, with that, let me hear your stance or your opening philosophy on objection handling, and then I promise to the listener that we're going to get lost inside of this topic and come up with some real tangible help for them.
I love that you referenced that quote about humanity, right? Because you're right. This is the place where we tend to think about it all like conquest. If they say A, I'll be ready with B, right? If they set the volleyball up, I'll jump up and smack it down, right? It's like the whole idea that there's going to be a winner and a loser in this mix is fatally flawed, in my opinion. The other thing that I think is really flawed in the approach to objection handling is that I don't think people know why they're really in it because
Which people? What?
the seller,
Clarify that. Okay.
the sellers, because too often it's like, oh, they think, oh, I my job is to be counterfactual, right? My job is to like inform the customer about the difference. Like if they raise a price objection, I'm going to tell them why we're worth more. I'm going to tell them why the other side is worth less, et cetera, et cetera. Right? I want to throw in here two things that I think are the actual objectives of that objection handling portion of a sale. Number one is to shorten the timeline to ultimate resolution. And number two is to expand the available information. So if my customer, if I'm intentional enough and fortunate enough to have the customer say to me, Doug, we're not going with your company because of X, Y, or Z. You don't fit the profile. We don't believe your audience matches up with who we're after. We don't believe you've got the capability. Whatever that objection is. I think that if you go into it with the idea that like, okay, ultimately I want to shorten the timeline to get to the real answer, and I want to expand the available information, I'm going to approach this with a questioning strategy, not an answer strategy. So you asked for my sort of opening position, right? I think that effective objection management or objection handling means asking three meaningful questions before you offer any information to your customer. It's patient, right? I like to say this is the part of the sales call where we're on the off ramp. So it's all about slowing down and being aware, right? And really listening and understanding it's not so important what your customer is saying, but why they're saying it. And if I can get to that, then I can come back to my boss, Michael Hess, and when he says, Doug, how did that sales call go? I can say, Michael, here's what's really going on. This is where we really are with this customer. And here's what we need to do as a company to resolve the gap that exists here. Or to be able to say to you, we're going to have to let this one go. We're too far away. This is how we retool and set up to serve this customer better next time.
There's one more, or, hey, Michael Hess, manager, I didn't know how to deal with it. And that level of honesty, I think, has to exist with the seller to admit that they need more training, they need more support from their manager. I think that's actually an issue I'm starting to see more and more, probably in the last 10 years, as the validation for why the Weaver Collective needs to exist, why you and I need to continue to help sales managers out there, is to give them the encouragement and the confidence to tackle something big, hairy, and audacious like objection handling training, which is to say proactively going in, and you and I have taught this a lot. We should pretty much, back to the baseball metaphor, we should pretty much know that that pitcher that we're up against probably has 3 pitches. And so if we can try to understand situational instances where he's going to throw one versus another, our success rate goes up. No different than with a buyer. Going into a buyer interaction, understanding the profile of the company, the profile of that buyer, the level of that buyer, we probably can assume that that buyer only has one of 3 objections, and therefore we should be able to have prepared for that. I think that
you went right where I was going to go. Right.
Oh, damn! I'm not letting you be the guest.
No. This is wonderful. I have a slide that I show that I used to show salespeople in my workshops, and it was like, okay, here are potential objections. There was like 10 on the slide, and they're reading this and they're going, yep. And I said, okay, so you can probably change the language, but like, how many more do you think there are? There's probably not 1,000. There's probably not 50. Maybe there's 2 or 3 that I did. Maybe there's 15, right? But there's not an infinite number. So the one thing that a sales manager can do with a seller before they go into a sales situation is to say, so ask me the closing question. Ask me what you're going to ask them to do. Ask me for the business. And then stop and say, what do you think they'll say? Let's anticipate the objections. So in anticipating those objections, I think it's really important to say, well, they'll probably say our price is too high. Okay, yeah, good. What question will you then ask them to qualify to see if that's the real sticking point, right? What do you think they might trade for a little bit higher price? What do you think is valuable? So think about the questions. Think about how you're going to keep the conversation going. Because the more information that the customer puts on the table, the better your position is. The more you can do with it. So anticipation, right? Like projecting what objections we might hear. Right? We don't have to be surprised and go into fight or flight mode when we get an objection. Right?
Exactly.
I think the objection is something valuable. That's a step that I can begin to climb on.
The importance of role playing and prepping those scenarios prior to these interactions becomes such a premium. I will shout out, the first podcast I did this year was with a gentleman named Jason Sy. Do you remember him on the buy side at all from years ago? Universal McCann, I believe.
Yeah, I think I do. Yeah.
Jason is now a senior executive at a company called Pivotal. He's based in London, and he's working in a consultancy position, helping companies use AI as tools to emulate real situations. And he brought to light in the podcast, which is only a couple weeks prior to this one, that there are some pretty good software and AI machine learning type tools out there that can emulate the buyer once you feed into them your appreciation for here's the top 5 objections that we hear or the top 5 obstacles. And I want to talk about that in a moment, the difference between those. And basically, I think that's great that there's any tool out there that a seller can use that helps them practice. But I still think it's best when there's a person in the form of a peer seller where you jump on a Zoom, or in the old days when we were in an office, although some of our sellers are coming back to an office. Hey, Doug, let's jump in a conference room. I got this meeting coming up on Friday. I know they're going to ask about X. And I want to feel the pressure of that real-time stress so I nail the answer. You be the buyer, feed it to me, and let's analyze my response. That still is paramount in terms of the prep that goes into, in my opinion, objection handling is to really get that practice.
Yeah.
Have you run a lot of those types of exercises, and what have you learned? And now a word from our sponsor. What a coincidence. Today's MySalesDay podcast sponsor is the MySalesDay newsletter. If you're enjoying the show and you want frequent, directional, and inspirational selling ideas, then the MySalesDay newsletter is for you. If I told you that going to the skills gym each day would cost you only 2 minutes of attention, you would sign up in a second. That's the premise of the newsletter. Early each morning, a punchy, action-oriented skill reco comes to your box, focusing you for the day. Who doesn't have 2 minutes to work on their skill development and career growth? The risk of not subscribing to MySalesDay might seem insignificant until you imagine your competitors reading it. Get an edge. Put in the time. Head to mysalesday.io after this show. Or heck, why wait? Pause the show, head over to mysalesday.io and subscribe. Better habits, better selling.
Yeah, in fact, one of the core components of the closing, I do a workshop on closing skills, and part of that is focused squarely on this process. And I think that what many sellers who engage in that with me, right? I'll have them kind of, okay, you tell me what are some of the objections that you anticipate from this customer. So you're going to ask me as your customer to do X. You're going to ask me to recommend a $500,000 deal to the client to run in January. All right, what are a couple of the objections you think? Oh, I think you'll object to the price, and you'll object to the fact that you don't have enough people to actually do it right on your side. You don't have the content resources or whatever, right?
You're not ready. You're not ready with the, where you are in your with your business, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I will literally stay in character with them and feed it back to them, and I'll start by complimenting them. Hey, Michael, thank you so much for coming in. It looks like you guys done a great job. We're big fans of your company and your site and so forth, right? But we just don't have the people on staff to do this thing right now, right? So really kind of an obstacle. But I give the seller the provision that they can't offer any information. They have to ask me at least 3 questions to qualify what's going on here. And some will really struggle with that because their instinct is to get in and answer that question, right? Oh, we can take that over for you and so forth, right? Do you know if it's even the real objection? Is that really why they're not buying? Why they're not committing, right? Or is there something else? Are they already in the groove with a competitor and they're already far along with the deal there? Like, you don't have enough information, so keep me talking. Keep me talking. The negotiation expert Chris Voss has some great techniques on this. I love his stuff, and he talks about just like he was a hostage negotiator for the FBI, and he said, whether it's a customer across the desk doing a potential deal with you or somebody's in a bank holding hostages, right? Keep them talking. The chances of a happy outcome go way up the more information and the more that they talk. So your job as a seller is to keep me talking. And
yeah, sorry.
go
Go
ahead,
on,
sorry.
please.
No, the last thing I was going to just mention was that you asked the question, you know, how is this instructive? What are, what are people surprised by? People are surprised by like how weak their questions really are,
Yes.
right? How unprepared they have been for this process going in, how unstructured their approach has been. And again, I didn't teach them this with the idea of like making them feel bad. I really went into it with the idea of service and really helping them because they've done a good job for this customer up until that point. They've worked hard to get the meeting. They've worked hard to make sure the offer was right, that it's well supported and so forth. And the customer deserves their help. The customer deserves the good things that your company can bring to them. So, and I guess this is a good place to, to put a pin in one other idea. Closing and objection handling is not something you do to the customer, it's something you do for the customer. This is a form of service, right? Not a form of combat.
I was just gonna offer that my experience as a seller, I never had sales training or trainers like you or me talk to me about things like empathy and qualifying and asking three questions and role playing it. But I do remember this. I do remember how I felt when the conversation in the interaction turned heavy and it created anxiety. The temperature went up in my body, felt like it went up in the room, but it did not. And I felt that I was not able to do anything other than get out of that particular thread. And your initial statement that this is a timeline issue is really the foundation for how sellers need to think. Every quarter, you start the meter fresh and you get a new term and the clock ticks day one all the way to day 90. And you're either going to make your quarterly quota or you're not. And when you look at your opportunities, you know when it's like bad cheese and starts to stink because your company has data on the average cycle it is to close a deal. If you're waiting to even the midpoint to try to fish out what those objections are or proactively surface them, you've waited too long, especially in this day and age where we're oftentimes negotiating through email, and that means we're handling objections through email, and that's a horrible place to be. That preparation, you said something so valuable, which is you weren't trying to make people feel uncomfortable with that role play. But I also want to go back and for all the sellers who I used to put under the Klieg lights and they'd say, "What is Hess talking about? He made us uncomfortable all the time." I did purposely. I did. I wanted discomfort. I wanted them to figure out how to wrestle through something that was challenging in front of their peer so that they didn't have that flight problem when it got sticky, if they were even lucky enough to talk about objection handling in an interaction with somebody.
Yes.
So I agree.
Yeah.
I mean,
Once again, I mean, we find ourselves in violent agreement. But I do want to I want to reinforce that with a theme, right? And so that's something I tell a lot of teams. I say, look, practicing is not easy, right? This is like, being in an environment in front of your peers and role playing, things like that, that is going to be uncomfortable, right? But I want to take a step back from this relatively insignificant stuff that we do and look at, firefighters and paramedics and police officers and, in the military, first responders, right? They do a lot of drilling. They do a lot of exercises, right? Why is that, right? It's because when when that firefighter goes into the burning building, right? He or she doesn't want to have to like make a million decisions and try to engage that part of the brain, right? You're in a stressful situation, right? So the more that you can have that's pre-planned, the more that you can have in place, the anticipation of the situation, the potential moves that you're going to make, right? All that stuff. It's just, it's something fundamental about the human mind and the human spirit. right? You want to, the more that you prepare and practice and so forth, you're just stronger in those situations because you don't have to like entertain 1,000 things, right? You've got a plan.
You got a plan and you can execute and you don't squander a situation. Multiple times when I was a sales manager, seller would come back, and these were in the days when everybody went out from a central office and they came back. And you knew where they were going as a sales manager. And if you happened to be in the office when they came back, what's the number one thing I would say? Hey, Doug, how did it go? And invariably, and you were a sales manager for a bit as well, and they would always answer the same way. It went great. Have I ever had a seller who said, I threw up all over the buyer? Or, I mean, they might say, wow, that was really hard, but for the most part, they're going to frame it in, pretty nice terms. And I learned quickly as a sales manager to say two things. Number one, what went great about it?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, of course, trying to get people to think. And number two, and if you do that enough, then people are prepared to answer that. And number two, I would say, what objections did you unearth? Which I think, given today, where, I don't know, how much of our selling is through email and video versus in person, 90%, and then breaking it down further, probably what, 10% video, 5% in person, and 85% email? Does that, I mean, somewhere in there, we can haggle, but somewhere in there. How are we going to surface objections through email? How are we going to do that? We're not. So what I actually teach, and I know that you like this strategy, is that there is no such thing as objection handling season as part of your courtship of a customer. There is no part of the funnel where you say, oh, I'm in stage 3. I've done discovery. I've created interest. Now I start objection handling. I just say you move objection handling up to the discovery phase. A couple reasons. Number one, you may never see that person again. Number two, you might see them on video again, and that's going to be challenging to get them to talk about objections. Will you remember? You got other things to do. Number three, it's so much easier to come and say, look, hey, we're having a good meeting, Doug, but I'll tell you right now why and how we stumble with certain customers like you. Here's the 2 reasons why people like you slow this down. These are the 2 common objections. And that is a technique that I've had success with called proactively seeding objections. Did I create the term? No. I just love the technique.
Yeah.
And if we can get sellers to do that, then they're going to have a higher frequency of hearing you give me the truth when we're talking, where I can get that information.
Yes.
I don't think I have a question as much as what other types of techniques similar to that have you taught and or found success with?
Going back to the framework that I've taught through over the years, it's sort of a cobbled together approach called leading with needs. And it starts with, like, I sit down with, Michael Hess, my buyer, my client, and I say, hey, Michael, before we get started, right, take a look at this slide. Here's a handful of things that I learned in my research about where you guys are. Just take a look at it and tell me what you think. I mean, especially what did I get wrong or what did I miss? What am I not talking about here, right? So right away, information starts to flow. What I'm not doing is like having a, okay, I'm going to do a presentation now, and then and then there'll be a time for you to ask me questions along the way, right? So immediately I'm forcing it to be a conversation by getting your reaction on that first thing that I've done, right? The second thing the second card I'll turn over is the diagnosis slide, which says, hey, before I tell you about any of the stuff that my company can do, here's the problem that you guys are facing. This is why you're not selling more product or so forth. And again, this is just a hypothesis. So take a look at this, tell me how you really feel about this. What did I miss here? So right away, it's like I'm asking the customer in, I'm setting a pattern of inviting them into the process, right? So when I get to the prescription part, so checkup, diagnosis, prescription, when I get to the prescription part, which is, hey, here's the combination of media and targeting and technology and content and so forth, I've got a little timer in my head that's going off every 30 seconds or minute or so. And I'm saying, so Michael, by the way, this point I just made, would that be hard for you guys? Would like, who in your organization would take responsibility for doing that, right? How have you built budgets for things like this in the past? So I'm with you completely, brother, when you say, you know, you don't want to wait and kind of like just have it all bunched up at the end, right? You want to constantly, through the relationship and throughout the sales call, I'm constantly asking you questions, bringing you in, and they're not self-serving questions. I don't want to get a happy answer, right? What I'm trying to do is to just like, you know, take collect information along the way, so that when I ask you to buy this combination of things that I'm selling you, right? You've already answered a whole bunch of the questions, and you've said, if there's a problem, I can take time to go deeper on that. And one of the most important things that I can have in my arsenal is a really simple 3-word phrase, which is simply, tell me more.
Mm. I also look at your approach. I think of 2 words that describe it: installment qualifying.
Mm.
Getting that approval, getting the incremental. I mean, let's face it, sales is just a process of incremental approvals that are strung together to create success at the end. But
Yes.
you're chopping it into that micro installment qualifying that is so necessary. And it brought up a question that I have for you. And that technique is definitely learned, obviously. We're not born with that. And maybe we're inspiring somebody who's listening to say, yeah, I'm not checking enough on whether this stuff is landing. But also, I've seen sellers out there, the ones I've either managed or trained, they try to do that, but they're not really listening. Because if you
Mm-hmm.
do listen closely, sometimes, and I've seen this happen, a buyer will kind of recoil or just kind of, you could check body language if it's on video or in person, if you're lucky enough. And you'll be like, oh yeah, that's a problem. Like I need to slow this down and I need to lean into that. Back to something that started this thread, which is on top of the installment qualifying or proactively surfacing objections, what would you say to the seller out there listening? And I'm sure there are some sellers who are listening saying, I don't feel comfortable bringing up objections. It's going to make me too nervous. And by the way, I was taught as a seller, this is because I've heard this, I was taught as a seller to just keep things positive, just keep selling value. Fine, I'll qualify. I'll do your little installment qualifying thing, but to bring up potential negative topics, I was taught never to do that in sales. How would you advise that seller to change their thinking?
I always remember the quote from John Shalikashvili, who used to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he was addressing like leadership at the Pentagon, and he said to them, "I know change is going to be hard, and you're not going to like change, but you're going to like irrelevance even less." Um, that's a harsh message, right? But I think that like to the seller who is wants to avoid objections and who doesn't want to kind of like do the hard work of selling, and who doesn't want to get to that honest place with the customer, they're going to find that theirs is one of the Rust Belt jobs in media. Right? Those jobs are going away and they're never coming back. Right? If you think your job is to just exchange information between your management and the customer, right, and and collect some business along the way, that job's already been automated out of existence. The
Yeah.
buyers have tons of ways of collecting information. They have the ability to kind of to manage price. They don't need you, and your management doesn't need you either. So what I offer, and I will tell sellers, have told them over the years, look, I really care about what happens to you. I think this is a noble job. I think this is a courageous job. It's a hard job, right? But it can be a great position if you go into it as a human, right? So be curious, be service oriented, try to help these people, right? And if they don't end up buying from you, then your company can't really help them. So get out there and be a mensch.
You're, there's a quote I've used in one of the My Sales Day newsletter posts. I can't remember who wrote it. I write the newsletter every day for 6 days a week, so I can't remember every one of the quotes, but it was something like it was from a trainer and one of these motivational bodybuilding trainers, physical trainers. And the quote went something like this. He said, "Yeah, I know it's hard getting in the gym 5, 6 days a week. Yeah, I know it's hard stacking weights and pushing those weights. You know what else is hard? Losing strength, falling down. That's hard." This conversation about those who might be afraid or fearful or a little anxious. It's not. I mean, no, the sellers aren't really afraid. They're just they lack that little edge of confidence that would get them to that performance state that would bring out a much better outcome. And I never forget, I had a great team at one company I managed, and I was teaching objection handling pretty aggressively. And it was a consensus from them that they said, "Michael, can we change the language of the script that you're feeding us so we don't say to the buyer, hey, what problems could derail this deal right now?" And this is the context of, I don't want to bring up something negative. So we had to wordsmith this particular language, and we came up with, what are the issues that might get in the way? What are the challenges that might slow us down?
Yes.
And my response to them was, I'm fine with diluting the language if it makes you proactively go after this topic on
Yes.
every interaction.
Yeah.
But just appreciate that some buyers will interpret it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
So some of them will take the easy road out and just continue to say, oh, there's no issues. There's no challenges. No, you didn't ask the specific question. How could this deal potentially get derailed? Which brings me to something that I think is it's minor, but I did promise that we'd talk about it. In your opinion, what's the difference between objections and obstacles? I think there's a very fine line.
Yeah, I think that I think that the way that most sellers would probably see that is that objections are opinions and obstacles are technical hurdles or process hurdles of some kind, right? But I think that the going back for a second to your previous thread, right? The fact that you gave these guys a script and you said, like, ask them this question, like, so the standard is that, like, we don't leave the meeting without asking this question. We don't leave the meeting without, asking them, like, hey, so whether or not this happens, do you think it's a good idea? And why do you think so? Hey, if, it sounds like you and I are really aligned on this and this is something you'd like to see happen. If you were me, what would you be paranoid about? Right? Like, when you've tried to sell through things like this in the past, how has that gone? Tell me about the approval process. So those steps, this is like the firefighter or the EMT, like, kind of scenario planning and preparing. Confidence isn't something that you teach. It's not sort of a vessel that the manager can fill up in somebody. The confidence comes from the work and the process. So when I work with managers, one thing I tell them is, like, don't try to argue with the voices in people's heads, right? Don't try to kind of, like, fill them up with confidence or change the way they think. Focus on their behavior. Change the behavior and they will change their own minds. And that's, so again, just like you're doing as a manager, you're doing them a service by by laying in specific standards and a specific process. And the confidence will flow from that. They will have quality experiences with customers. And they won't do it right the first time or the second time, but they'll get better at it. And
Right.
you know what? When you meet with them in 7 years and they're taking you out for a dinner at some great new job they have, and they say, Michael, God, the work you did with me when I was at your company like made such a difference for me. This is one of the things they'll talk about, right? You made me do things that I wasn't comfortable doing, right? You made me better.
That is, thank you for articulating it that way, because that's all the sales manager should be trying at that point, is just, if I can get you to at least talk about these things. And even though your language, even though the question may not be as direct as it needs to be, you're going to walk out of there, you're going to lose a deal, and you're going to say, geez, what did I do wrong? I asked for the objections. Well, did you? Did you ask it in the specific language that
Mm-hmm.
put the buyer on the spot,
Yes.
which unfortunately, objection handling success is contingent on putting the buyer on the spot to answer. I didn't say make them uncomfortable. Putting somebody on the spot is just saying, I need a specific, direct, honest answer. That's
Mm-hmm.
what that means to me.
Yes.
So I think that's really, really crucially important here, is just for the seller who's listening right now, incremental steps. I mean, you and I will go into a potential client and we will just be very honest and say, why wouldn't you do this deal right now?
Mm-hmm.
Many sellers they'll say, I could never ask that. Okay. What version of that question could you ask? Start with that. Get more confident. Because I
Mm-hmm.
go back to the first thing that you said, and it is time. And one of the motivations for every seller is ticking that closed lost box on their CRM.
Mm-hmm.
And you might say to yourself, well, it was because of price. I couldn't do anything about it. It was because of this. It was because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Secret that I'll share. I'm not trying to put the cape back on, but when I was a sales manager and I was building my CRMs for closed lost, I never put price in there. I took it out as an option because price should never be an option for why you lose a deal. Didn't articulate value enough. Didn't handle objections.
Right.
Your CRM loss reasons have got to be far more uh, upstream in the process of what were the selling behaviors, not,
Mm-hmm.
oh, no, they didn't have the budget. The price wasn't right. That's a cop out for the seller.
Mm-hmm.
And it can easily be preempted through your installment qualifying preemptive questioning about objections. I want to also throw out something and hear what your experience is on how you've taught your sellers and managers over the years to understand buyer motivations. Because I have this premise with objections, and I kind of always envision every account has got, let's just say, and this is, you and I come from digital media, but there's some buyers listening, sellers listening who don't come in this industry. And it doesn't matter. It's the same thing. If
Mm-hmm.
you're in B2B sales, you got committee buyers. And let's say, just some odd numbers, you got 8 people who are, quote, on a buying team, and maybe 4 are the ones with decision power that really, really matter, right? And this is how I always, as a seller, looked at objections. I can't assume that each of those 8 people share the same objection. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, that's pretty dangerous to make that assumption, which means that catches the seller who says, oh, I handled the objections with the main seller, with the main buyer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but did you do it with the other 7 people or
Mm.
the other three
Yep.
KDMs? So
Yep.
sometimes we exhibit these behaviors and we apply these habits, and we say, we're good. Checkbox. I seeded objections, I
Mm-hmm.
dealt with them. But you didn't
Mm-hmm.
do it universally across the buying team.
Yeah.
What are your teaching philosophies to get sellers to go after, let's take the 4 KDMs that matter on that panel of 8 buyers. How do we get them to find out the differences in objections per other than asking, but more importantly, their motivations. Because motivations and objections, real quickly, they're tied to each other.
Truth is delivered in small rooms.
Good answer.
You know that if I haven't used up my quota of metaphors on this
You're
podcast,
good. You're good. You're
the
good. You're good.
one thing I would tell sellers is I want you to think about the sale like a legal case. And any lawyer or judge or any officer of the court will tell you that the case is never won in the courtroom, right? Not like it is on Boston Legal or Perry Mason or L.A. Law or any of the millions of legal shows that have been out there, right? Nothing dramatic actually happens in like the big room, right? It's really about how you perform in the small rooms. So it's the discovery, it's the discovery meeting, it's the sidebar with the judge, it's the meeting in the judge's chambers, it's the this, so a lot of small rooms. So I would say it's like, the first instinct that a lot of sellers have is let's get everybody together in a room. And I would say it's like you've just made your sale 100 times harder, right? You make it harder by a factor of 10 every time that you add a person to the mix, right? Because now you're not just dealing with like the objections that Fred might have or that Stacy might have. You got to deal with the fact that like Fred and Stacy hate each other, or that like they're going for the same promotion and whatever. So it's like, hey, this small little human conversation, right? If I call up, or if I get a hold of the head of the group and they say, well, yeah, why don't you like come in and like do a lunch and learn, or come in and have a meeting with the team and so forth, right? Oh, great. Hey, thank you for that, Michael. I will definitely do that. There's a couple of questions that I think only you can answer that'll make this more valuable, right? So I'm all for setting up a sidebar, right? Or just a quick conversation, or having that conversation on the spot. So lots of little meetings are what's going to ultimately make you successful, because then everybody's going to feel like the outcome was their idea. They're going to
Yeah.
feel a real sense of agency and authorship. And you're going to avoid all
And
those nasty politics.
and they're going to help you with somebody else who might be stalling uh,
Yeah.
progress or feeling left behind. I love that. And again, it gets back to something that you brought up, which is having the confidence, having the courage. Let's face it, objection handling is a courage game, right? It's also a practice, a prep game, of course, but you got to have the courage. And I would say if you're one of those four people that I've got to like find out your buyer motivation, I would lean into it and say, Doug, I've talked to the other three and I've asked them what the objections are right now, because we all feel that we're on the 1 yard line here. And we've done this, you've done that, you've asked us to do this, we've countered with that. So we're ready here, Doug. What are your personal objections, but also what do you want out of this deal?
Mm.
And sometimes when you couple that together,
Yeah.
you might get, to your point, you might get truth.
Mm-hmm.
And you also might get insight. The next question is, hey, Sue seems to like, I don't know, Sue's weird for me to figure out, Doug. She
Yeah.
nods her head, her head goes up and down, but I don't get the sense that she's on board. Do I have to worry about anything with Sue?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's that intimacy that we really have to get
You,
at.
you know, one of
The first thing, yeah,
sorry.
go on.
No, I just wanted to pick up that theme really quickly. A couple of tools, and we wanted to be practical and get as much kind of actionable information into this discussion as we could. And one of the things that I always recommend that sellers do in their closing and objection process is like um, spend some time on how the decision will be made, how the budget will be built, right? The implementation of the plan. So if I can pull the work forward, to ask you, Michael, what objections do you think that the people on the team have, right? I don't know if people really want to own the objections. I don't want to feel like I'm the one just cogging, just gumming up the works and making the machine grind to a
Yeah,
halt,
good point.
right? But if I say, hey, listen, I appreciate that you appreciate the great things you've said about about the idea here. Let's shift focus and talk about like what happens next. Tell me about the process. Like when you've pitched things like this to the client before, right? Where have they run aground? Tell me a little bit about like how would the client build the budget for something like this? Where might it come from? Who are the other people who would need to be involved? And is this something? How will they make this decision? Does it tend to be a committee when it gets to the client? Let's talk about implementation, right? So you've I know that you guys are sensitive about headcount and hours going into this, right? So I know that Mary, Steve, and Janice are all on your team, right? Who would do what? So think about the curiosity and I'm almost assuming that like if the sale goes forward, how would this stuff happen? I'm getting a ton of information, right? And the more that the client is talking about the implementation, the more real it's becoming on their side. So I think you're going to get a lot of honesty if you ask process questions.
Yeah, yeah, no, good one. Hey, this has been fantastic. All it tells me is that we're going to need another session on this topic because we just do. There's many notes I wrote down. I'm like, geez, I didn't get to that. I didn't get to this. And of course, right after we end this particular show, you and I, our brains will be firing, additionally. But give me the one or two bona fide Doug Weaver musts when it comes to objection handling, and then I'll offer mine, and then we'll wrap it up so we can all get back to doing what we're doing. What's your one or two takes from got to do this in OH land?
When it comes to the closing process and the objection process, and you rightly said that that's going on throughout the sales conversation, you must know what you want and why you want it. Too often sellers set the bar too low, right? I don't want to piss them off. I want to get through the material, right? And it's like, you mentioned, that as a sales manager, you would say, hey, how did it go? Right? And Michael, very early in my career when I was selling print, I remember coming back to the office and just come off of a great, a bunch of sales meetings up in my territory in Connecticut. And my boss said, well, how did it go? And I said, oh, this meeting was great. And that meeting was great. And so on and so on, And my manager put his hand on my shoulder and he had this kind of amused look on his face. And he said, Weaver, great sales calls are the comfort of the weak seller. Stop telling me how it felt and tell me what the hell happened, right? So the mechanics of did I go into that sales meeting with that customer with a real intent? Did I know that if I was meeting with Michael Hess, who's the head of investment, that I specifically wanted to ask him for his recommendation of this? And did I get the timeline that I wanted for this? Did I really understand exactly how the budget is? If I go in with specific actions that I'm trying to drive, right, I'm naturally going to be more focused and more confident. Secondly, the why, right? Why am I doing what I'm doing, right? Hey, my job is to get more information on the table. I really want to understand where this deal stands, right? I want to really understand the true qualification. I want to help this customer, and I want to set us, and I want to close and I want to shorten the timeline to where we can get to the place to really help them. That's a lot of confidence is going to come from that clarity.
That's got to be one of my number one takeaways, which is let the clock motivate you. I didn't use the word scare, but motivate you. And if you look at your opportunities and say, man, I got 90 days to put a number on the board, or my number's on the board, all of a sudden, every interaction is sacred. And if I don't proactively surface objections or seed objections and deal with them, I'm probably extending the timeline between now and close, but I'm probably losing the deal at the same time.
Yeah.
Doug Weaver, what a treat. We got to cut you loose because you got to go work on the collective. And that means it's time for me and you to remind the listener why they listened. And of course, they listened because They are trying to be the best sales professional that they can be, even if they're reading my Sales Day newsletter daily, or you pick up one thing that Doug said in today's podcast. It could make a big difference. Your mind, however, has got to be open, and in the case of objection handling, you got to grow a backbone. So get courageous. Remember, better habits equal better selling. Doug, it was so great having you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Always a pleasure.
Dude, that was fun. Good job.
That was great. Did you feel like we got to the practical stuff that?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for listening to My Sales Day. It was great having you here. For more, listen to our other episodes on your favorite podcast platform. And while you're there, leave us a review. I care what you think. And because I'm a seller like you, I got thick skin, so I can take anything you got. You can also visit MySalesDay.io to join our email list and community dedicated to sellers just like you. My Sales Day is a podcast by sellers for sellers. And if you got something out of today's episode, help out a friend by sharing this episode with them. My Sales Day is proudly produced in partnership with Westport Studios. Views and opinions expressed by guests on My Sales Day are their own and may not reflect the views and opinions of their organization. Start your sales day the right way with My Sales Day. I'll see you in our next episode and in the daily newsletter.